everybody, it's Colin with the National Democratic Training Committee here today, and I'm so excited because we have this vlog series with expert trainers from around the country sharing their expertise with us. And today, I get to chat with Gabriella Cascone. Gabriella, welcome, and can you share a little bit about yourself before we get started today?
I'm Gabriella Cascone. I'm the National Training Director at the 2020 Victory Coordinated Campaign, so for the Biden for President team, as well as all of our Democrats down the ballot. I use she, her, and hers pronouns as well.
Thank you so much for your time today. I know you're going to have a lot to share with us. So let's get started. How did you get involved with training in democratic politics?
I cut my teeth in organizing, originally when I was a college student with my local Planned Parenthood group. I got involved as a freshman. And then a few years later, I worked in organizing at 2 different Planned Parenthood affiliates in New York State. And then later, I got my first taste of electoral politics when I went to work on the late Senator Kay Hagan's 2014 campaign in North Carolina. And so through those experiences, I knew that great training programs and support for staff were one of the key components of building any successful organization, and then particularly in electoral politics. So, and I believe this because training creates really important context for the work, which helps drive buy-in for staff and volunteers. And it helps show our staff and our volunteers that we really value them and their development by taking that time to invest in them. So I started taking on some training tasks for my region as an organizer in the Iowa caucus in 2015 for Hillary Clinton. And then later on made a pitch to my boss to hire me as the North Carolina training director. And so that was 4 years ago, and I've been working in training ever since.
That's a whole lot of training, Gabriella. How does your current work with the Biden-Harris Victory 2020 Coordinated Campaign look like with regard to training?
I joined the Biden for President team back in the primary. We were a team of scrappy and hungry folks, May of 2019. We started getting our organizing efforts up and running off the ground back in May. And since then, I've been the national training director running the national training program to support the work of our states and specifically our organizing staff in our first 4 states in the primary, which were, of course, Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. Along the way, I took a few detours to Iowa, Nevada, Mississippi, Tennessee, which was lots of fun. And then later supported our organizing work in the Super Tuesday states and beyond as we transitioned into a remote workforce prior to the nomination. And then since securing the nomination and creating a coordinated campaign across the board with all of our states, I've built a training program to support each of our 17 battleground states and supported our coordinated campaign partners. Another thing that my team does that I have purview over is that we support the training program for the National Distributed Organizing Team. And they are responsible for and engaging folks across all 50 states with a focus on those non-battleground states, those border and expansion states.
That's a whole lot. Sounds like y'all have been super busy since you hit the ground running. With all of that training and all of the work that you do, how do you approach training, or what is your training philosophy that you've developed over the years?
I think first and foremost, I like to think about training as a full-scale program. It's successful when it's serving the needs of your program's goals in both a proactive and a reactive way. So, for example, if your training program is supporting an organizing program like mine that I just described, it can only be as successful as it is relevant to the needs of that program, not just the one that you imagine that it should be. That's really important to stay relevant with the needs and the ongoing learning needs of your staff and your volunteers. So that means considering both dynamics of the training audience, as well as not just the individual training you're giving, but also what's the ecosystem of trainings you're delivering over time. That's really key to understanding how your folks are going to develop over time. I'm also really passionate about and always trying to find ways to build into my program tactics to serve the needs of mid-level managers. Part of that comes from the idea that we often teach people the skills to do the organizing work, but not always how to be an effective and empathetic manager of those doing the organizing work. I think that's really important for everyone's success. Of course, finding ways to build multiple modes of engagement, from discussion questions to breakouts, using videos, even just being conscious of and being really intentional of your facilitation practices and how those tactics that you use in the room, so to speak, virtually or in person, how they communicate to your audience that you are very present with them. And I think that's really important, especially in a virtual world, is showing that presence. It's just important to any great training. And then when I think about the content specifically that I'm building, making it well designed, easily digestible is really key to ensuring that folks can feel that your content is accessible and relevant to them. So the way I like to think about that is starting from the beginning with really great writing so that you can clearly define what your training's desired outcomes are. I think that is essential to telling the story of your work to your audience and driving that narrative with them.
Thinking about different audiences, approaches, and goals, the National Democratic Training Committee trains candidates, staff, and local leaders all over the country for free. And we have an amazing trainer community that helps us train so many people at that scale. What impact does NDTC's work have with regard to training and democratic politics?
First of all, thank you so much for the work that you're doing to ensure that we build the bench at the local level all the way up. I was so excited when NDTC launched, and I've been proud to be part of your training community because I think that an organization that exists to deliver great trainings that are accessible and free to Democrats up and down the ballot is really imperative to building our power at the local level, which is where most of our policies have an opportunity to have the greatest impact on our everyday lives. So I've been really energized and inspired by the NDTC trainees when I've met them at live trainings over the past few years, and just getting to hear from them, what they're excited about, what kind of change they want to see in their community. That's been really meaningful to see folks visualizing themselves as agents of change.
Out of all of your training work, what is the most important thing, I'm sure there are many, that you have discovered or learned while developing trainings?
I started touching on this earlier, but great trainings require, I think, both time and space for imaginative ideation on content, design, facilitation, all while sticking to and maintaining an effective project management process to ensure that you're able to meet the training goals, the content delivery goals that you set out for yourself so that you can hit your deadlines and deliver your training when you need to. I think starting out by asking yourself, what do you want to accomplish with the training? And then being able, like I mentioned earlier, to name your desired outcomes in the beginning, it really allows you to, along the way as you're developing content, point back to those desired outcomes later in the process as you're making decisions throughout creating your content and narrowing in on what is really important to touch on in this training, as opposed to what might make sense for a later training. And that's why, I mentioned earlier, it's really important that you understand the full picture of what your training program will look like. What is the ecosystem of trainings, like I said, so that you can think to that and think about that in intentional ways along the way as you work through creating your content. And I always try to stick to 3 desired outcomes. So anything that, like I said, doesn't fit in one of those outcomes, it just doesn't belong in this training, but maybe it belongs in another training.
You have so much training experience, and you've certainly learned a lot in the training world. What is one piece of advice you would give to folks who are learning to increase their training or facilitation skills?
There are a few things that come to mind right away. First of all, being present for and showing your presence to your audience is a really important piece of building that genuine connection with them in the room, whether it's virtually, right, or in person. And I talked about that a little bit earlier. So some specific tactics that I think you can use to do this and show this really well is by showing that you're listening for real, like I like to say, by calling back to something that a participant brought up earlier in the training, whether it's an anecdote they shared or a question they asked, and then connecting it back to something else that you're talking about later in your training. That really shows them that you're using those active listening tactics, as we like to talk about them in the training community, and that you've really heard what they have to say, and you're present for their training experience. You can also do this by sharing specific examples when you're giving an anecdote that you'd like to tell to connect to and really highlight the point that you're trying to make and emphasize and drive that. I think it shows that you have a hands-on connection to the content that you're training on, and you really understand what you're talking about, which makes them feel seen and heard. And of course, last but not least, preparing for training is really important to bringing your full self. So knowing ahead of time when you're going to ask for someone's feedback or ask for participant engagement with some intentional guided questions will help you facilitate that engagement in the room, which will help your folks really feel like you are present for their learning experience. I think one other thing that's really important is that it's not easy to get in front of a room, whether you're virtually there or in person. So kind of adopting a mindset of fake it till you make it, really talking yourself up and using some positive self-talk to breed a sense of confidence in yourself will help you feel that you can own your training, and also really help you tap into and find your voice as a presenter. Everyone has a different style of facilitation, and when someone can see and connect with you being present for that and you being able to own your voice, they will feel a lot more engaged with the experience and know that you are showing up for them, so they should show up for you.
That's a lot of great advice for folks getting ready to increase their training and facilitation skills. And Gabriella, thank you so much for your time today, for connecting with us. And I'm so excited for people to learn more about you, as well as all that you have learned and shared with us today. So thank you so much, Gabriella. This has been a delightful time.
Well, thank you for having me, Colin.